Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Planning Committee of Bath and North East Somerset Council. We're meeting on Wednesday the 13th of March in the Council Chamber. It's unusual for us to be in the Council Chamber, and the layout of the room doesn't lend itself particularly well to the committee, but we'll do our best. We've also got some new tech that's just arrived. We've got new microphones. Can I ask that you do use the microphones? All you need to do when you're speaking is press the button on the right, and when you're not speaking, just press again and it comes away. If you are speaking addressing us to do with the planning application, you don't have to come forward to a particular place. You can do it from where you sit, so long as you're near to a microphone. I hope that's clear enough for now. As I said, my name is Councillor Duncan Hounsell. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm now going to ask the officers on the top table to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Griggs-Trevarvan. I'm the team manager in the development management team.
Hello, Simon Eliason, a senior lawyer in the Place legal team.
Slight technical hitch. First technical hitch. We'll just pause for a moment.
Services.
Yeah, that's working now.
I'm Ian Halsall, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Thank you. Right, can I remind everyone to switch their phones, iPads, laptops to silent during the meeting? The meeting is being filmed, and the recording will be available on the Council's website. Anyone speaking that does not wish to be filmed should just make themselves known to the camera operator in the corner. I'll now ask the Democratic Services Officer, Karina Haskins, to my side, to read out the emergency evacuation procedure.
Thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the green running person signs to the exit using either the marble staircase at the end of the building nearest to Bath Abbey or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence or any substitutions? Right, we have none. Okay. Declarations of interest. Do any committee members wish to declare any interest in the items we're discussing today? No. Urgent business agreed by the chair. I don't have any urgent business. We now hear the Democratic Services Officer informing us about the public speaking procedures.
Thank you, Chair. Speakers will be called to speak immediately after the case officer has made their presentation about the application. The order of speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as follows. Parish Town Councillors first, but we haven't got any today. Next, objectors to an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. Supporters of an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. Ward councillors not on the committee who have indicated that they wish to speak may do so for a maximum of 5 minutes. Speeches will be timed by the traffic light system you can see on the table next to me. At the start, the light will be green and will turn to amber when there is 1 minute of speaking time remaining. When the light turns red, speakers should immediately conclude their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Minutes of our meeting on the 14th of February have been circulated and in fact, updated. Are these approved as a correct record? Councillor Jackson?
I'll propose they're a correct record.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Simon. Right, we now move on to what's described as our site visit list. These are two applications where we've conducted site visits. The first one that we're dealing with this morning is 22/05081/FUL 53 Rockcliffe Road, Bath. So I now invite the case officer, Isabel Deon, to present her report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this item went to a site visit a couple of weeks ago. It's for the erection of a 3-bedroom dwelling with associated landscaping and car parking in Bathwick. So members will hopefully have seen the written update report which was circulated, which clarified some points about the term brownfield land in the report. But I did just want to provide a verbal update that missed the written update with regard to the dwelling orientation comparison. I'm going to talk through the previously refused scheme later in the presentation, but essentially the officer report states that the proposed dwelling has been reorientated 90 degrees since the previously refused scheme. This is actually an error. The scheme which this refers to was a withdrawn scheme which showed a sort of T-shape dwelling within the plot, which was orientated slightly differently at the top of the T. So the proposed dwelling has been orientated slightly differently and positioned slightly differently from the refused scheme. The footprint's increased and the form of the dwelling, as described in the report, has changed. So I just wanted to clarify that the orientation, siting and form of the proposed dwelling, when considered in the round, results in a scheme which, in the view of officers, responds to the shape of the plot. I just wanted to clarify that. So moving on to the site location plan, you can see it outlined in red and 53 Rockcliffe Road outlined in blue. This is the site, you see my laser hopefully, just here. You've got the flats which the committee will have seen on the site visit just up here. I was asked to include an aerial image of the site in 2017 or before it was cleared as a result of the permission for the change of use to garden land, so I've included this for reference for the committee as requested. So you can see the trees that were on the site prior to this. As detailed in the report, the trees have been removed as part of the previous consent, so they were removed lawfully and with permission. The yellow hatched line, which I hope you can see, just denotes the flood zone. So the site is within flood zone 3. Again, this is discussed quite at length in the report. And then I've included some site photos. So members will remember this, we walked in and this is the proposed access up the side of the dwellings on Forest Avenue. And then we've got looking into the site, so we went in through the Harris fencing, so these are the dwellings on Rockcliffe Road here, and then Forest Avenue just over here, and the same with the photo below. Then this photo is moving slightly further into the site, still facing the same direction. You can just see the flats just here, poking over the wall. And then this is walking to the other end of the site, so this is standing with your back to the rear of the dwellings on Rockcliffe Road, looking towards the front of the site and the entrance, which is just over here. And again, these are the dwellings on Forester Avenue. And another view there. And then just facing towards the flats to the rear. So at the request of members, I've included some of the plans from the previously refused scheme. I haven't included them all, but I've included those which I think are most pertinent. So this is the proposed site plan for the previously refused scheme. Again, you can see it's got quite a similar arrangement to the current scheme, with the access up the side of the dwellings on Forest Avenue and then through the site. And then this is the dwelling here. I've measured the footprint from this plan as approximately around 80.8 metres squared. That is an approximation, but hopefully should just give members an idea of the scale of the previously refused scheme. This is the design of the previously refused scheme, so you can see it is quite a lot taller than what we're considering here today. The height to the roof ridge is around 9.5 metres. The height to the eaves, so just to the top of the wall here, is about 6.85, 6.86 metres. Again, it is raised and built up because of the location of the site within the flood zone, and the height the finished floor levels need to be. I will say that we are obviously assessing the current scheme on its own merits, but this is a material consideration that there is a previously refused scheme for a dwelling at the site, so hopefully this provides some better context for members. I'll then move on to the existing and proposed block plans of the current proposals. So here is the dwelling within the plot. The footprint is around 140 metres squared. Again, I've measured that off this plan. I've got the measurement here at the closest point to this boundary is around 2.3 metres. And then from the boundary with Rochford Court, that's the flats to the rear, it varies from 1.4 to 2 metres from this boundary, depending on sort of where you measure from. So moving on to the proposed plans, you've got the proposed ground floor plan, which is the undercroft. So that, obviously the dwelling is built up, so that has the parking, cycle storage, air source heat pump, refuse storage area. Then you've got the first floor, so this has the main bulk of the living accommodation. You've got the kitchen living area and 2 bedrooms. And then the second floor plan, so there is a small projection which hosts a bedroom, and then the proposed roof plan with the solar PV and roof lights shown as well. Moving on to the proposed elevation, so this is as if you're looking into the site, the west elevation, and then the east elevation which faces onto the dwellings on Rockcliffe Road. And then the south and north elevations, so the side elevations, I've just included some approximate heights on here as well. So the height to the eaves of the second floor, so around here, is around 5.9 metres. The height to the top of the sort of third floor here is 7.9 metres. And then the drawing of the louvre detail at the rear of the dwelling, this is the louvre detail which faces onto the rear gardens of onto Rockcliffe Road. And those who were on the site visit remember we actually went into one of those properties and stood in the garden. And just for reference, the landscaping plan which shows the proposed landscaping on the site, the tree planting which is accommodated on the site as well. So the officer recommendation is to delegate to permit, subject to the conditions listed in the committee report and a Section 106 agreement to secure an off-site contribution for trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, now move on to our public speakers, and can I just ask Mr. Andy Harrison to speak first, who will be objecting to the application. So when you're ready, just press the button on the right.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of 50 Barthwaite residents who objected to this application. And as you saw from your site visit, local opposition to this development of a residential garden remains resolute. A local planning consultant has been engaged and produced detailed policy-based objections to this scheme. These objections were not addressed in the report to committee, but form the basis of the points I am making today. The officer's report claims the reasons for previous refusal have now been met, yet having visited the site and seen the design, this does not seem credible. The site is a residential garden and the key policies are D7 for backland development and D6 amenity. As you saw on site, houses in this area are arranged in short terraces facing the street with rear gardens backing onto each other, minimising overlooking. Front doors are parallel to each other, meaning neighbours have daily interactions. As with the previously refused application, this large detached house has no relationship to the character or design of the frontage buildings. It could not be more different. There is little change between this and the refused application, and in terms of its environmental impact, this application is worse. The building is still in the same position at the end of a long drive at the back of a cramped plot, isolated from its neighbours. The footprint is 81% bigger than the refused scheme, and almost double the footprint of houses on Forester Avenue. It's over 21 metres long, which is the length of 3 adjacent houses. It is still 3 stories high and only slightly lower than the flats. It still overlooks the houses in Rockcliffe Road, and the residents of Forester Avenue and Rochford Court will look at a 6-metre high stone wall. The increased footprint results in less space for environmental improvement, and biodiversity and tree replacement cannot be met on site. Therefore, in terms of D6 and D7, it is not in keeping with the character of the area, it is not well related to the frontage buildings, and it is not appropriate in height, scale, mass and form, and it does not achieve appropriate levels of privacy and outlook. Over the last 6 years, the applicant has caused massive harm to the character of this conservation area and the local amenity. They've removed all the trees from the site, failed to meet their tree planting obligations, failed to repair boundary walls, and have actively maintained the site in the poor condition that you saw it in on your site, on your visit. The development of a single overly large residential dwelling does not justify this harm and has absolutely no public benefit. If the committee decides this harm is acceptable, then you're saying that any backland development, irrespective of its response to local context, would be acceptable in Baines. And we therefore urge you to vote to refuse this application and retain the special character of the conservation area and the residential amenity of our neighbourhood.
Thank you very much. Right, the next speaker is Mr. Will Collins, who's speaking in support.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today to represent the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Millwood, who have lived in the Bathwick area of Bath for 20 years. The applicants currently live in 53 Rockcliffe Road and want to stay in this area of the city, but wish to downsize to a smaller property as their children have grown up and will be no longer living at home full-time. This new property would be a self-build, whilst also meeting Baines' low carbon policy criteria aimed at minimising carbon emissions and impacts on climate change. The new home would also be of a high quality design that respects and enhances the World Heritage Site and Bathwick character area of the conservation area. Prior to this application, a pre-application inquiry was submitted to Baines in January 2022, and a positive response was received from the council stating that the proposal is for a high-quality contemporary scheme, low in mass and scale, which utilises natural Bath stone and relates appropriately to its context. As such, it is considered a planning application for the proposal would be considered favourably. This pre-application was undertaken after a previous scheme for a taller detached house was refused in 2021, which we've already heard about. Following this positive pre-application response from officers, which acknowledges the scheme is low in mass and scale, a detailed scheme was drawn up and submitted, which again gained a positive response from officers, including the conservation officer, who raised no objection to the proposal. The proposed dwelling would consist of a contemporary flat roof design that ensures it's considerably lower than all nearby dwellings. Throughout the application process, the applicants have responded positively to requests from officers, including in relation to overlooking concerns raised by some local residents, as well as tree planting and biodiversity. At last week's site visit, members will have noted that the site consists of hard standing and gravel, which has been in situ for many years now. As the officer's report confirms, the application site is derelict land. Much of the party wall on the northern boundary is in poor condition and will be remedied as part of this proposal. At last month's committee, members raised some concerns which I'll seek to address now. In regard to potential overlooking on the proposed east elevation, care has been taken to ensure there will be no overlooking by proposing external perforated screening louvres to 1.7 metres above the finished floor level. A detailed large-scale drawing at 150 scale was submitted with the application and shows that views from the new dwelling would be obscured, and this was shown by the case officer in her presentation a few moments ago. The south-facing elevation, meanwhile, would have no fenestration directly facing neighbouring properties to the south, meaning there would be no opportunities for overlooking or loss of privacy. In regard to tree planting and biodiversity, the applicants are making significant commitments. Approval of this application would lead to an improvement in the appearance of the site with a detailed landscaping scheme prepared by a Bath-based landscape architect, ensuring planting and biodiversity benefits. There's currently no existing planting on the site, but approval of the application will result in the planting of a total of 13 tree species, green screens, shrub beds, hedging and wildflower
if you could
turf.
bring your comments to a close.
Sure.
Thank you.
This will assist with soft landscaping and biodiversity and greatly improve the appearance of the site. The officer's report supports a recommendation for approval for this high-quality self-built new home for Mr and Mrs Millwood, which would sit lower than all the surrounding buildings we saw on last week's site visit. The officer's report confirms that the application is acceptable subject to a planning obligation to secure a tree replacement repayment and a set of appropriately worded conditions which the applicants agree to. I hope members can support Mr and Mrs Millwood's proposals today. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, our next speaker is the ward councillor, Councillor Manda Rigby.
Thank you, Chair, and can I thank all the committee who managed to come out and go on the site visit, because I think it made some things very clear when you could actually see for your own self. What you saw in terms of the length of the house was that it goes along for 3 houses worth. In order to be made viable, the house has to be of that size. What you saw in terms of height was that in order to raise it out of the floodplain, I take issue with what the applicant has said about it being lower than all the other houses around it. It is about the same height as some of them, and it goes nearly as far as the lower sill on the flats. You also saw the loss of trees, and I was very pleased to see that the aerial photo was there. This is a garden, this was a garden, that's what it was there for in the conservation area of Bathwick. You had it confirmed that this is a garden, so that the policies that you need to look at are those of backland development, and as we all know, it is possible under certain circumstances to do backland development, but they need to be special. So is this application one which does adhere to the policies that we have on this? Its orientation, given the long, thin nature of the site, runs counter to absolutely all of the existing buildings, which, as you saw when you were there, typified by small terraces with gardens behind and with all the front doors facing out onto the road. It runs counter to our conservation area key attributes. Leafy Bathwick is what we are referred to. This is one of the few areas of green left on the Bathwick estate. I know that there's always a balance to be struck, and on the plus side, there is obviously one additional dwelling. But on the negative side, we have overdevelopment of what is a small site, and certainly an orientation which does not favour what is currently being proposed. On the negative side, there is loss of local biodiversity. It is fair to say that the applicants are offering to plant externally and do some planting on site, but that is nothing compared to what used to be there. Overlooking of residents nearby. There is a choice here. Either the development has to have no windows, in which case a flat featureless wall will be what people will see. One of our residents allowed you to go through their house into their garden so you could see what their view would be like. Or if there are windows put in, they would be overdeveloped. So I would argue that all these policies are contrary to backland development policies. Finally, committee, within a conservation area, we are very, very clear that any application has to enhance or conserve. And I would argue that what you saw on the site visit and what you've seen presented today does neither. If you wish to have specific policy numbers, were you to want to grant refusal, the policies that I've referred to are D2, 3, 4, 6 and 7 of the Baines Placemaking Plan 2017, and D5 and any 1 and any 6 of the Local Plan Partial Update, which are our current policies. I would also argue it goes counter to the provisions of the National Policy Framework, which obviously our plans follow. So I would urge you, please, to reject this current application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigby. We now move to questions to the case officer. So who would like to go first? Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions in my mind. I do think that the site visit was enormously helpful, and we should thank the officers for facilitating this and the residents for letting us look in their gardens. But what I can't quite work out in my mind from these drawings, is this building significantly smaller than 53 Rockcliffe Road? They talked about downsizing, but is it that in fact, or is the sort of mass about the same, just differently configured? That's the first question. Secondly, I wondered if we could have another look at the flood amelioration measures. I couldn't quite work out whether the building was going to be on stilts or if we're still going to have a concrete floor or something. So if you could have a little bit more detail on that, I'd be very grateful. And finally, the roof. I think it's an ordinary, what do you call it? Sorry. An ordinary roof, a hipped roof, and it's not going to be a sort of flat green roof, is it? What does the roof look like, please? I missed it, I'm afraid, and I can't find it in the notes.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I will answer the last question first, or I would if this was going to respond. There we go. So yes, the roof is a flat roof. I'll just go back to the roof plan. So it's not a green roof, largely because it's accommodating the solar PV in order to meet policy SCR6, which officers consider it is compliant with. So it is a flat roof building. In terms of the flood measures, yes, it is essentially built up on these I'm not going to call them stilts, but I guess kind of walling plinths, because it does, the finished floor level of the main living area, which is the kind of the main bulk of the living area, I think has to be, I think it's around 23 metres AOD, so it has to be a certain height in order to comply with the flood resilient measures. In terms of the massing, I haven't worked out the cubic kind of meterage of both the dwellings. I think what I'll do is show you the site plan here. So you can't quite see actually number 53, it's just slightly cut off, but it's obviously a similar size to these dwellings down here. So for reference, they are obviously kind of, let me just pop back to the photos. So you can, so you can see them. These are the ones on Forester Avenue, but they're, you know, kind of standard house size, I would say. They've got, you know, they're 2 stories, etc. Obviously, the footprint of the dwelling, I've said the previously refused scheme was 80. That has increased to around 140. The height has got less, so I can't tell you whether or not it's a smaller dwelling, really, because I don't have all the measurements for 53 Rockcliffe Road in front of me. I would suggest that it's not really a planning consideration as to whether the applicant is downsizing or not. I think we need to assess the application that's before us and the scale of the dwelling that is before us. That's more a kind of personal consideration that the applicants wish to downsize, and I haven't given that any weight in my planning balance or consideration.
Right, the next question I'm taking is from Councillor Halsall.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, Izzy, I'm talking to a pillar. I do apologise for that. It's a question we get relating to the trees. So the aerial picture that showed the site when it was fully treed is very valuable, but you know, it is a matter of fact that the site has been stripped and there are no trees there anymore. So the question relates to the offsetting and the Section 106 agreement. Is the Council's policy that the applicant is required to provide a contribution and then that will be pooled and then used by the Parks Department to use wherever it sees fit within the district? Or Is there any opportunity, or does the council own land or park? Is there a parkland that would be of direct benefit to the residents of Bathwick rather than it sort of being contributed for the benefit of Bath and North East Somerset residents?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm also going to look at the pillar. So our planning obligations SPD basically sets out our tree replacement policy, and there are set numbers of replacements depending on the scale of the trees that have been taken down. So generally, you will need more trees to offset the loss than you will have actually removed. So the landscaping plan shows, sorry, so many plans. Here we go. So the landscaping plan does show some replacement tree planting, but it's not enough, and the site cannot, reasonably accommodate enough. Our own tree officer has said that there's not enough space for, there to be meaningful, any more sort of meaningful tree planting than what they've shown. So yes, in order to offset that, we've asked for a contribution, which is in line with our SPD. Having spoken to our parks team, the wording of the Section 106 hasn't been agreed at this stage, but they haven't asked it towards any particular locations or projects. I think they would prefer the wording to be more flexible to ensure, obviously, that the money can be spent and is spent on tree replacement planting. I mean, obviously, there will be a preference for putting trees closer to the site if locations allow, but that is something which will be looked at a later stage with our parks team once the contribution has been secured.
Right, I'll take Councillor Simon at first, and then Councillor Gurley, then Councillor Hodge. Okay, Councillor Gurley.
Okay. So it's a question about the height of a building that needs to be built in the floodplain. Because I'm guessing that the ceiling of the undercroft must be 2 metres plus. Is that a set amount that it has to be built up there? Because I did drive around the area, and none of the other buildings around the area have got that amount of allowance. Obviously the Victorian houses have got 2 or 3 steps, and even the flats haven't got that amount of land underneath them to raise them above the floodplain. I suppose part of my question is, why does it have to be so high that it pops up over the wall of the surrounding areas? Why do they have to have the undercroft? And could they put the parking elsewhere? And therefore bring the whole thing down so it doesn't seem quite so much like an alien landscape.
Thank you. So I don't have the flood risk assessment in front of me, but obviously what I will say is the surrounding dwellings were built, quite a significant period of time ago. The flood risk assessment does set out that the finished floor levels for the primary living space do need to be at the height that they are proposed, and that has been consistent from the previously refused scheme as well, which you will have seen from the drawings which I showed you was also kind of built up on stilts, for want of a better word. So obviously introducing new dwellings into a flood zone is something which is quite stringently looked at and assessed. So it is a safety requirement. I don't have anything tangible really to challenge the height on the basis of the argument that it is required for flooding. The flood risk assessment confirms that. So I've accepted that is kind of the reason for the height and have not asked the applicant to make it any lower.
Councillor Hodge, and then Councillor Simon.
Thank you. I've got questions relating to the arboriculturist's objection and the louvres in terms of overlooking. So turning to the trees first and that objection, I just wanted to be clear, in the report to the committee, there was a condition in the 2017 application that there should be replanting of 16 trees on site. And I just wanted to understand that the removal of the existing trees does not represent a breach of planning control. What weight should we give to the condition? Is that the condition hasn't been met? Is that a breach of planning control and it won't be met in the new design, a return of 16 trees to the site? Secondly, I just want to understand with the 2 policies that form the basis of the tree officer's objection, NE1, the proposed development will maximise opportunities for effective and functional green infrastructure on the site. I'd just like to understand how this proposal maximises the opportunity to meet that point. And with NE6, a development will only be permitted where it includes the appropriate retention and new planting of trees. And the implication in point 2 is that replacement tree planting is only relevant really where there's an adverse impact on trees is unavoidable. An adverse impact on trees is unavoidable by developing this site, and then you go for replacement tree parking elsewhere. So I just wondered how you feel those policies are met by the plan that is in front of us.
Thank you. So I don't have the condition from the 2017 scheme, but I have set it out in my report that so the trees were removed as part of the previous consent. Yes, there is a condition on there that those trees should be replanted. The issue here is that the previous consent has been implemented but not completed. Now, to the best of my knowledge, our planning enforcement team has looked into this some time ago, and I don't think action was pursued because the scheme's been implemented but not completed. So it's not. There's very limited powers for a council to essentially force somebody to complete a development. So our arboricultural officer, I believe, did actually object to the previous scheme. I don't have the report in front of me, but from my recollection, that is the case. It was obviously permitted, so the loss of those trees on site was accepted, subject to the replacement planting. That doesn't preclude another scheme coming forward on the site, and I think the view of our tree officer is obviously that there was this condition, so there was going to be some replacement planting, and that hasn't happened. So this permission is essentially trying to secure what it can on the site whilst obviously facilitating a dwelling, because that's what the proposal is for, but also providing the off-site contribution to offset for those trees that have been cut down with consent but cannot be accommodated on the site at the moment. So and my view as an officer is that I think it would be quite difficult to defend a refusal reason on the basis of not complying with NE1 and NE6. There is, as you can see from this plan, there is soft landscaping on the site. They are accommodating tree planting sort of as much as they can with the dwelling that they are proposing. I think even if the footprint of the dwelling was less, there is quite limited space on this site for tree planting. You know, you've got the boundary walls, and things like that, which all kind of influence tree growth. So my view is that those policies have been complied with. I don't think the loss of trees would be a reasonable reason for refusal in my view, because we have already accepted that loss and they are compensating in line with our policies in the view of officers. Obviously, the committee can come to a different conclusion.
Can I just pick up on the point of accepting the loss? Is the lack of enforcement of the 16 trees? So we made a point that wasn't clear on why the enforcement, saying that we've accepted the loss, the enforcement just hasn't taken place of the condition, which is different, I think. And then I'll move on to the second point, was on the louvres. I presume there's quite an extent of glazing on the aspect, I think it's the easterly aspect. Louvres, I presume, allow looking out, and so would overlooking considerations still be relevant if that extensive glazing has louvres on it? So are overlooking considerations still relevant?
Just before you respond, the team manager here, planning, would just like to address the first question that you asked.
Yes, just because I have the advantage of being able to bring up the condition on the previous consent that's been discussed, and the question of whether it's a matter of enforcement not being carried out or not. It is, as the case officer said, the development was commenced but not finished, and the wording of that condition requiring hard and soft landscaping, condition 6 on that previous consent, required those replacement soft landscaping works to be carried out prior to any occupation of the land. So because they never finished it, that trigger was never met, would be my understanding. So there isn't any breach of that planning control for enforcement to take action against. But I'll allow the case officer to answer the other point.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I was going to clarify the same thing, that we don't consider there is a breach of planning control and that those trees were lawfully removed. In terms of the louvres, I'll just go back, here we go. So yes, overlooking is still a consideration. It would be policy D6. Officers have assessed that the louvres mitigate the level of overlooking to a level that isn't significant. So the test in the policy is whether there would be any significant impacts to the residential amenity of neighbouring occupiers. So officers have concluded that it's not significant. There is this mitigation in place. Again, the committee can come to a different conclusion, but you would be right to be considering overlooking in policy D6.
I've got a couple of questions. We have a number of policies around urban design, and I'm just looking at some of them here. Policy D5 talks about good, modern, innovative design being supported, but also we have policy D2, which talks about a development needing to positively respond to the site context, in particular the local character. Can you, for this application, these two policies seem to be, in opposition. So can you explain why you believe that the development has positively responded to the site context?
Thank you. Yes, so obviously, let me just move back. There we go. So yeah, I think, as outlined in the officer report, this design is a modern contemporary design that is quite different to anything around it, and I think the officer report definitely has regard to that. I think the fact that it's a backland site and it is lower in height than quite a lot of the buildings, in fact most of the buildings surrounding it, as you can actually see in this image, you've got sort of the dotted outline of the surrounded buildings just to show you that for context. And the fact that the materials reflect the locality, you've got high quality natural materials proposed and a condition securing details of those should the application be approved. I think for a development to respond to the context, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same as what's there. That's not what the policy is asking for. I think a lot of different factors, such as the site layout, the scale, the massing, come into play. So my view, and as concluded in the report, is that because of the lower height, the use of materials, it does respond to the context and its location. Again, that's, the view could be taken differently by the committee, and that's not a problem at all as long as it's justified. It is a modern design, but as I say, for the reasons in the officer report, I think it's appropriate in this setting.
Thank you. I just have a second question. The first speaker referred twice to this being backland development. In other commentary, it's been described as a garden. Is there an important distinction between the two that needs to be made, or are they really different ways of describing the same situation?
I went too far there. So, as I said before, and as I've clarified in the update report, this site does have permission to be used as garden land by the occupiers of number 53, and as we'll have seen on the site, that permission's been implemented. There is there is a shed on the site, can be used that way, but it is also a backland site. There are frontage buildings in front of it on two sides in this case. So I have assessed it in design terms under policy D7. In terms of the principle of development, the site is within the urban built-up area of Bath, where policy B1 essentially directs residential development, the spatial strategy for Bath. So in this case, I think it should be assessed under policy B1 and D7, as I have in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Just to clarify, we could just clarify on this issue of heights. We're saying that it's lower in heights, which it is if you're taking into consideration the roof line, but if you're taking in terms of window heights and living accommodation, it's not lower in height than the surrounding accommodation. Is that right?
So I don't actually have the window heights marked up on this plan. Obviously, all I can show you is this drawing and the other drawing, which shows, yes, it is lower than the maximum height. Obviously here, it's broadly similar, slightly lower than the eave height of the flats next door. This is obviously the projection, the sort of small projection in the middle. The main bulk of the building is at this level. I know on site there was quite a lot of discussion about where this would come up to on the building. I don't have that information because I don't have detailed survey drawings of the Rochdale Court, the flatted development next door. So all I can show you is this drawing, and the judgment has been made on this basis, and the committee will have to do the same.
Okay, because looking at that, I mean, it's only lower in height by virtue of it's a flat roof. But window heights, it looks to be the same, if not higher, than the surrounding properties.
I mean, I don't have anything further to come back on that, really.
Councillor Simon, you've been waiting very patiently.
Thank you. Yes, I had technical difficulties. I think largely it's been covered in the officer's response to your question, but just to confirm that in her report, although it has permission to be a garden, because it hasn't been developed as a garden, it doesn't invoke the garden grabbing aspects of the framework, but equally it's not to be regarded as brownfield, and therefore its status is really therefore backland that is empty and currently derelict. Is that fair?
I think there's quite a lot of focus on this garden, backland, brownfield, and I don't think it's particularly relevant. There was a permission for it to become garden land, as we've said. That has been commenced. The trees have been removed, but it has not been completed. You know, there is some movement towards some of the garden being used by number 53 as garden land, but as you will have seen on the those who went to the site visit, a lot of it sort of remains gravelled, undeveloped. I have done in the update report, have spoken about it being brownfield land. I have discussed that obviously the MPPF talks about previously developed land being brownfield land, so that's land where they, you know, that's had building on it, etc. But garden land is not to be included in that, and I think we've got this situation where there's sort of a bit of an in-between, where you've got an implemented permission that hasn't been completed as a garden, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is a backland site. So and it is within the urban area of Bath. So in terms of the principle of development, policy B1 says that we should be directing residential development into the urban area of Bath. So I don't think there would, you know, there'd be grounds for a refusal on the basis of the principle.
Right. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you to the case officer for answering questions. So we'll move to the... we have a question from Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, I'm confused about this definition of backland, because it's at the back of the Victorian houses, and I can see how the officer's argument works, but surely for the block of flats and the other dwellings that were the other side of the wall, it isn't backland, it's in front of them or to the side of them. And can we have a definition of what backland is? That would be really helpful. And secondly, if you were living in this house, and Councillor Hughes has made a very relevant point about the fenestration, how would your rooms be lit if you've got all this blank walls and louvers and things?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I don't actually have the definition of backland development in front of me. I don't know if Chris is able to find that. It's in our policy D7, but I haven't stated it in the report and I don't have it here. In relation to your other question, there are roof lights, roof lanterns proposed, and an officer satisfied that there is sufficient light to these areas. There's also a little window here for this bedroom, and there are some windows on the kind of little areas that project here on the sides, so that they're not looking directly into neighbouring properties. So officers are satisfied there would be sufficient natural light to each of the habitable rooms in the dwelling.
Right, the Chief Planning Officer here can give us some help with policy D7 about backland development.
Yes, thank you. So in the local plan policy, there isn't actually a backland definition within the glossary. It's a more sort of generic planning term, which is and you can't sort of, it's not measured in sort of codifiable ways in the sense of, you know, it's got to be such size and such location. But generally speaking, it would be land that is to the rear of existing development, and usually it's in a built-up area as well. And it is distinct in our policy from infill development, which usually means the filling of a small gap between an extensively built-up frontage. This is clearly not a frontage, but it is, you know, in a built-up area. So I can perfectly understand why the judgment has been reached that this is a backland site, and I think that would be a definition. I think planning professionals across the land would probably agree with the definition of this site as a backland site. That is a separate question from whether it's garden or previously developed land or whatever, but this is a backland site, and so the policy D7 is the relevant policy to be looking at, along with other policies that has been referenced today.
If I can just add to that, I'm just reading from policy D7, point 3, and it's saying this: backland development could be supported where, and there's 4 conditions, if you like. The first one, it's not contrary to the character of the area. It's well related and not inappropriate in height, scale, mass and form to the frontage buildings. There's no adverse impact to the character and appearance, safety or amenity of the frontage development. It's not harmful to residential amenity. That's the policy. Right. I was closing the session with question about where we questioned the case officer. Is it just one last call? Anybody else want to ask a question? Right, thank you. Now we move on to the debate, and it's a 2-member ward, and Councillor Simon, who's on the committee, is a ward representative. So I invite Councillor Simon to speak first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had an interesting debate. Perhaps I should start by apologising for the fact I couldn't make the site visit because I'm a member of the West of England Combined Authority Audit Committee, and that was meeting. So I had a commitment which I had to give priority to as a councillor. But I obviously have visited the site, I've seen it, and been able to think about the issues raised and to hear what you saw when you visited. Second, the applicant raised some things that I think we can leave out of consideration. Certainly anything said in pre-application is not relevant to deciding the merits of the final case. It's merely advice, and we shouldn't be swayed by the personal circumstances of the applicant. This isn't a personal application. The question of consistency with the area, which we've been looking at, I think that there's been focus on 2 sides of the area, the rears of Forrester Road and of Forrester Avenue and of Rockcliffe Road. But also we need to consider the fact that the area is defined by Forrester and Rochford courts, which are much more modern buildings and add to the character that needs to be considered in the area. The question of backland we've debated quite a lot, and I'm happy to say that this is neither garden nor brownfield. It's an area that is in poor state at the moment, and we should assess it on that basis. I always start from the position that we need more housing. The housing crisis is sufficiently serious that we need to build houses where we can properly do so. So my inclination is to support the officer's recommendation.
Right, do you want to propose that as a motion? But hear the debate first. Right, next to speak, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Well, I would think I would disagree with most of that, to be honest. The need for housing we know about. We've got 5,500 households on our waiting list. This solves none of those, not one. And one house is not going to solve the problems of Bath and North East Somerset. I think we need to understand, this is a conservation area, so I think we've got to consider what it is we're actually trying to conserve. And I think the answer is, just by going on a site visit and looking at Rockcliffe Road, looking at Forester Avenue, looking at the design and all the aspects of the current area. Excuse me. So I think we need to be very careful about what we're conserving within a conservation area. I think what we've lost is the destruction of the trees, which is quite relevant to this, because what we're looking to replace it with is a property that has issues with the design, its mass, its context to the local area, the local conservation area, its height, the loss of amenity to neighbouring properties. So certainly I'm not going to support this application for numerous reasons. I think it is an overdevelopment, and I think that's borne out by the need for the off-site planting of so many trees to compensate. I'm concerned to hear that it hasn't reached the trigger point for enforcement with its previous application. That does concern me, that the trees can be destroyed and they haven't completed the application that they previously put in. So I won't be supporting this application. Thank you.
I'm going to take Councillor Halsall first and then Councillor Jackson.
Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion and questioning about the previous trees that are on the site. As I asked in my question and made that point, they've gone. What, as a council making this decision, we can't do is punish the landowners for removing those trees. We can't do that. It's impossible. It would be completely unreasonable. What we have to focus on is that backland, derelict land, and what is suitable to put on there. So we really need to sort of focus now, I think, get away from the trees and the semantics of, whether it's garden, brownfield, backland. I think we need to focus on the building itself and how that is going to affect the conservation area, which we need to preserve and enhance, and what impact the building will have aesthetically on the surrounding area and upon the neighbours, importantly, specifically in terms of the outlook of neighbours and the amenity of neighbours. Now, the building is contemporary, it is very high quality, it's bespoke design, it's not something just off the shelf. So I think the architects have considered the context very carefully. It's unashamedly modern, and I don't think we should sort of be critical about that. The city of Bath is thousands of years old. The fact is we have the majority of the city is a conservation area, and we have seen layers of different styles of architecture over that period of time. So we're not seeing some pastiche Edwardian or Georgian building or any replication of the Victorian buildings there. We've got layers of architectural history, and I think this building is just adding to that as a 21st century design in what is adjacent to a Victorian Edwardian aesthetic, but also don't forget we've got Forester Court and Rochford Court, which are post-war. So that, I think, defines the character. It is a mix of styles of architecture. Now, the building is going to be respectful of the surrounding materials, but there's no getting away from the fact that it is going to be very, very different. But I don't think that is harmful to the conservation area. I think actually, because of the fact it's derelict, I think it will actually help enhance the character and setting of the conservation area. So regarding amenity, well, we went onto the site and had a good look round, and we are in a suburban area. The houses on Forester Avenue, they benefit from quite generous back gardens, so there is a good degree of separation there. We were very kindly invited to go to a property in Rockcliffe Road, and we stood in the back garden, and it was pointed out to us where the eastern elevation, the one with the Louvre windows, would be. And given the context of it being a suburban area, I feel that there was sufficient distance to protect the amenities of those residents. Regarding Rochford Court, The only significant impact would be on the side windows, which I think serve kitchens or bathrooms, non-habitable rooms. So I don't think there's going to be any harm to those residents. There will be a visual difference. There will obviously be change. And I think that's something that maybe a lot of residents are going to struggle with. But I don't think this building is going to cause any harm to the conservation area or any harm to the amenities or outlook of residents. And I think, you know, it will fit in to its context quite well.
Councillor Jackson and then Larkin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm afraid I have to completely disagree with Councillor Halsall and with Councillor Simon, perhaps because I'm not a Bath councillor. I look at it with a different perspective and completely objectively, I would hope. But planning is always about context, in my view. This may be an admirable building, it may be very carbon neutral, it may have all kinds of useful eco-features, and there's a lot to be said for it. It's just, I think, in the wrong place. It jars on when you look at the Victorian designs on the one hand, and of course the Victorians are great innovators, and the Rockfort Court side on the other. It just does not sit within the grain of the design of the area. And I also think, well, I think, Chair, that you've read out the reasons in D7, the policy, and we are supposed to make these judgments according to policy and not according to personal preference. Three of the 4 points that you read out, loss of amenity, design, I would also add it's not enhancing the conservation area, you know, are reasons for rejection. So I will be moving that we refuse the application.
Right, so I just want to be absolutely clear. Are you proposing a motion now to overturn the officer recommendation?
At this stage of the debate, Chair, yes.
Right. In that case, what I need to do is ask if there's a seconder for that. Okay, right, I've got 3 hands up to be the seconder. Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second that recommendation. I come to a different conclusion to Councillor Simon and Councillor Halsall. I agree we can have a new house. It's an opportunity for a house on this site, and I haven't got a problem with a contemporary design in the right materials. But I feel there could be a house on this site that is, in my view, policy compliant, and I feel that the proposal that is in front of us isn't compliant with the policies that we have to judge it against, particularly D7. It's only supported if it's not contrary to the character of the area. I think the property is contrary to the character of the area. It has to be well related in height, scale and mass. The property, the footprint, is 3 times the size of the properties on one side and possibly twice the size of the ones on the others. The height is of note, and it's raised over 2 metres above the ground. So it's not, in my view, it's not compliant with D7 or D2, the character of the area. And I think it will have a significant impact on the residential amenity. I also think it's not compliant with NE1 and NE6 in terms of being a design which would maximise the potential to have trees and green infrastructure on the site. So those are my main reasons for seconding the motion in front of us.
Right, thank you. Just want to be absolutely clear on the reasons that are being proposed in the motion for overturning the officer recommendation. I've just made a note of a few, and I know the team leader here has also been jotting things down, but I just want to make clear before we think of a vote, people know what they're actually voting on. So we mentioned overdevelopment against policies D2, D7, D6, loss of amenity to neighbours. You mentioned NE1, NE6. Was there anything else that's missing?
No, I'm sorry, I haven't got the policies in front of me, but I think that's fairly comprehensively covered. I have to say, I think the tree question is an irrelevance. It belongs to a previous application. But I do feel there's not enough green space around this dwelling to fit with the context of the longer gardens that surround it.
Right, can I just ask the team leader here if he's satisfied that he's got the list of reasons to being proposed to overturn?
Yeah, so there's quite a number of policies that we could go through, but I think I'll stick to issues, and then officers can obviously relate the policies to those issues in drafting any reason for refusal, if that is the way that the vote ends up going. But from your initial motion, Councillor Jackson, I picked up that you were concerned primarily that the proposal was not in keeping with the character of the area and would be out of keeping, so contrary to the various policies around character of the area. It would be jarring and out of keeping with context. You were also concerned about loss of amenity. So if I separate those out into two issues, character and appearance, loss of amenity, and then I think you also did slightly start to mention harm to the conservation area. So perhaps I could ask you to clarify a little bit on that, because that's got to be harm to the existing character of the area, not just, you don't like the appearance of the building or you think it's too big. And then when Councillor Hodge seconded the motion, she did start to talk about, she brought in this issue around NE1 and NE6 and maximising green infrastructure and trees on the site. I just want to be really clear that we're not muddling up the issues of the loss of existing trees on the site, because as we've already heard in the discussion, the questions, those trees have already gone and they've been lawfully removed. So we couldn't say there's an unavoidable impact on trees, because there are no trees on the site to be impacted. The question, therefore, is really, and you've started to address this, Councillor Jackson, is about whether you believe the scheme has, in respect of NE1, which is about green infrastructure, maximise the opportunities for anyone. Obviously, officers' views are that, given the constraints of the site, the fact that they have to build the building up, and they've tried to keep it low as well, so that they've only got accommodation largely on one floor with one bedroom at a second floor, that they have maximised the opportunities for green infrastructure. But if you could just maybe elaborate a little bit on that and confirm whether or not that would also form part of your motion.
But I'm not sure you can apply this one. I don't fully understand what the current state of play is from the Secretary of State about flood risk. Obviously, the climate was different in Victorian periods, so it's not relevant.
I'm just going to stop there, because the question...
I'm wondering
we're
about...
sorry to interrupt, but we're trying to clarify this point about green spaces and the trees.
Oh, well, yeah.
Conservation.
There's not enough gardens, I don't even call it garden space, in relation to the bulk of the building. That's what I'm saying.
And just on the harm to the conservation area point, could I just, as a separate point, is that a separate point, or is that tied up in the harm to the character and appearance of the area generally?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Fine.
sorry.
Thank you. That's all right.
But Councillor Hodge, are you happy with that list?
It's just to be clear on the policies and anyone. So the arboriculturalist having maintained an objection is what I think it has been maintained throughout. So the policies, the green policies we've left with, what would you advise in terms of trying to reflect that the overdevelopment in terms of the size of the house, if you don't talk about trees specifically, has left us with inadequate green infrastructure? There could be a smaller house with more. It hasn't maximised the potential for green infrastructure. Do you think, which policy do you think is most relevant? NE1 or NE6? Or neither?
Yeah, I think NE1 is the key one. I mean, what I would say is whatever this is why I'm asking for clarity on the actual reasons rather than focusing on the policy text, because officers will be able to point in the reason for refusal to what ones are relevant. But in terms of maximising green infrastructure, then any one is the most relevant one. Any 6 may have some text, I don't have it directly in front of me now, that might be relevant, in which case we would include it. But I would say the focus of what you've said is directed towards any one.
I just want to make clear to everybody in the room that if an application is seen to be contrary to a policy or policies, that doesn't mean to say it necessarily fails, has to fail, because one then has to weigh up harms against benefits. I just wanted to make that clear. So we've got a motion on the table. It's been seconded. I think you've all heard the reasons why the proposer and the seconder have moved their motion. So we'll just have a time now to debate that motion. So, Councillor Gurley, do you want to speak?
Just to say that I mean, I totally agree we need more houses in Bath. This isn't going to solve the problem. It's a 3-bedroom large house. It's shoehorned into a very constrained site. It's compromised because of the issue of the windows. And I have to say, I look inside and I think, would I really want to be in one of those bedrooms when there's only 2 side windows and nothing much else? I mean, yes, there are some roof lights. I understand that it's got to be modern. It shouldn't be an Edwardian pastiche. But I think it's big and ugly and stuck in the site. And it could be smaller and could respond to the area. And actually the car parking in the site that was refused was outside. It was actually in the green space by the road. So, you know, you could have more trees, you could have more green space in the area. So I know we have to judge what's in front of us, but I think this is a missed opportunity for a house to fill that site. And so I won't be voting for it.
Right, just to be clear, you're absolutely right. We have to consider what's in front of us, the application in front of us, not what we might wish it to be. And also, you did make a point about you wouldn't like to live in it, but that's actually completely irrelevant to this planning application, of course. So we must not give that weight. Right, anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Warren.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't think I have an issue with the development there. It is a bit of wasteland at the moment. And as you say, we have to look and see what there is there. No particular issue with the modernisation of it either, or even the footprint. But my big issue is with the height. When you're looking, especially for the other houses, it's a shame it has to be so high off the ground for the floodplain, but it is what it is, so we have to accept that is the height. I think if you were to take that top room off, I'd probably be looking at it a bit differently today, but with that top room on, I just can't support this application.
Anybody else wish to speak before we go to the vote? Okay, we'll go to the vote. Right, so we have a motion to overturn the officer recommendation to permit from Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Hodge. We've heard the reasons given. So all those in favour of that motion, please show.
6.
All those against? 4. Right, so that's carried, so the application has been refused. Right, we'll take a break now. We'll have, I think, we'll go for 10 minutes, so long as we're all back within 10 minutes. Thank you. this morning. Again, this is one where we had a site visit. So we're looking at 23/00537/FUL, 14 Woodland Grove, Claverton Down, and I now invite the case officer, Paige Mosley, to present her report.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. So this is for 14 Woodland Grove for the erection of a first floor extension over an existing single-storey garage with a ground floor entrance lobby. So the site is shown here.
Sorry to interrupt, Paige. I think you're going to need to project your voice more.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'll go closer. Is that better? Any better? Okay. So this site is shown here in red, and again on the aerial view. And these are the existing and proposed block plans. So there's the existing single-storey garage there, and it extends slightly outwards towards the boundary. The existing and proposed ground floor plans, and the first floor plans here just show the main house, and on the proposed you can see that additional second storey. This is the southwest elevation, so this is looking at the main frontage of the house, and this is the southeast, which would be seen on the approach up the up Woodland Grove. This is from the northeast, so this would be seen from the rear houses, which, if members recall, we visited number 14, the avenue, which would be to the rear, and this would be seen from there. And this is from the northwest, which would be seen from other neighbouring gardens. This is the proposed roof plan, which shows the link and the light well there, and the degree to which the second storey would be set back from the ground floor. And this is a section there. And a proposed visualisation as it would be seen on the approach up Woodland Grove. And some slight photographs. So this is from Woodland Grove, from the front. And this is towards the rear. And it's just here on the aerials. I don't know if my cursor's showing up, potentially not. And these were photos taken from the garden of number 14, the avenue, which just shows where the sun was at that point in time. So that was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it would be travelling, so if from left to right on those photos throughout the day. So the officer recommendation is to permit the application for the reasons outlined in the committee report, with the conditions listed in the committee report.
Thank you very much. Right, we now move to statements from public speakers, and if I can ask Mr. Ralph Nunn to speak, who is objecting to the application. So when you're ready, Mr. Nunn.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the 6 close neighbours who have all registered objections. We thank the committee members for visiting the site, as this is the only way one can truly appreciate the mass and scale of the proposal. You will have seen how totally dominant the additional storey would be over our small gardens. It would be oppressive and overbearing as viewed from our properties. The proposed 2 storeys over 6 metres high would cause unacceptable overshadowing, loss of light and privacy to our properties and gardens at the rear, imposing severe harm to all our amenity values as set out in the Council's policy D6. In 2016, a smaller proposal without any increase in footprint was rejected as overdevelopment of this small site. Since then, the double garage has been converted into living space and a large single-storey extension added to the rear. The site has been extended twice to meet its full potential, and as neighbours, we have accepted all the previous developments. This new proposal includes a significant increase in the footprint of the existing building, bringing it closer to our boundaries. By proposing a further 64 square metres of living space, together with the two previous major extensions, the original house would be doubled in size from 156 to 318 square metres, effectively creating an additional house. Similar historical applications at 21 and 29 Woodland Grove were both refused at Planning Committee. The refusal of number 29, which was a similar extension over the garage, went to appeal and was upheld by the inspector as refused, and I quote, "Overdevelopment of the site, given the size and bulk of the proposal, and would have a detrimental negative impact to the amenities of existing occupiers." In this application, the size and bulk of the proposed extension would represent overdevelopment of this small site and would detract from the appearance of the existing building and Woodland Grove. It is still excessive and has an even larger footprint than the previous refused scheme, and the planning application should be reviewed for the reasons stated in all our objections.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time so perfectly there. Right, our next speaker is Mr. Tom Rock, who's speaking in support.
Chair, members, good morning. May I start by thanking members for taking the time and trouble to visit the site to inform your consideration of the proposals. I'm sure you observed the following. Number 14 and its single-storey former garage are set back from the road and only come into view when approaching the end of the cul-de-sac. Number 14 has a character distinct from the rest of the street with its long axis rather than gable end to the road, and the only property with a perpendicular former garage. Number 16, next door, with its recently added two-storey extension over its garage, and Belfield to the north, with recent similar extensions, are far more visible. The recently approved extensions to Belfield, and now number 20, directly opposite number 14, incorporate contemporary designs and materials, including timber and metal composite panelling. The proposed extension to number 14 will be barely visible from the avenue, and much less so than the recent extension to number 16 Woodland Grove. I'm sure you saw that. The proposals will enhance the energy performance and efficiency of the existing single-storey accommodation with its poorly insulated flat roof and single-skim walls, compared with the main dwelling, which is double-skim with an insulated cavity. This will deliver on your objectives of your declared climate emergency and your groundbreaking planning policies contained in your recently adopted local plan update. You have an extremely thorough, balanced and professional report prepared by your planning officer that provides you with a clear analysis and recommendation. I don't need to add to that other than to thank Paige for her diligence. I'd just like to reiterate 2 points. First, the current proposals bear no resemblance to the previous scheme that has refused planning permission in accordance with the recommendation and incorporate a wholly different design approach and are of significantly reduced scale and massing. Second, even with the greater mass of the previous proposals, it was accepted that there would be no harm to the living conditions of the occupiers of neighbouring properties, and no such refusal reason was included. Given the much reduced massing of the current proposals, there's no basis for reaching a different conclusion on this occasion. I'd like to thank your officers for challenging us on the design. In my personal and professional view, the scheme before you is better than at the time that the application was submitted. Chair, members, it remains for me to thank you for your time and to commend the recommendation to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you for keeping to time so appropriately there. Right, we now move to Councillor Manda Rigby, Ward Councillor, who's going to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, committee, can I thank you for not only visiting the river bit of Bathwick, but going above the snow line in your site visit and going up to Woodland Road. That was very good of you. And to be serious again, I hope you think it was a site visit that was worthwhile, because certainly the views both from the front and then going into the garden at the rear, I think gave a different aspect from what you can see just from the plans. Mr Nunn has said very clearly his views for objecting, so I'm not going to repeat those. What I am going to do, though, is mention something that hasn't come up in either bit at the moment, which is about choice of materials. I think it was very clear when we were up there that going along Woodland Grove, there was quite a lot of materials that had some wood and some wood cladding. There was less visibility of anything that was metal. And I draw your attention to what the officer said, which is, neighbours have objected to a view of metal cladding. This is obviously a contemporary material which is not typical of the area. But then went on to say, however, as it is contained to the rear, it's not considered detrimental to the street scene. I would agree that it's not detrimental to the street scene, but it is absolutely detrimental to the people who would have to be looking at it. So, regretfully, I am in a position where I don't feel that the committee should be agreeing to what is currently in front of you. I do believe that it is overdevelopment. I do believe it will lead to a loss of privacy, and I do believe it will spoil the unanimity of view from within the front. That isn't to say that I don't believe in this case that there isn't a possibility for something to be done there which does not have those harms. So, but all you can do is judge what you have in front of you right now, and what you have in front of you right now I don't believe fits with our policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rigby. Right, we've concluded our list of speakers, so let's now move to questions to the case officer. So who would like to go first? Councillor Jackson.
Sorry, I'm just watching this light because it keeps going off. But anyway. When the site visit was enormously useful, I think. I don't think I would have appreciated the spatial relationship of buildings to each other if we hadn't gone. But I was wondering, we were very kindly allowed into the back garden of the neighbour in the avenue. Could the officer indicate which direction is north, south, east and west, and what the effect of the extension is going to be in the amount of light that will come into the neighbour's garden, which I've got the impression might be quite dark anyway.
So on the site location plan, is there a way to get the laser? Is the laser that was on the, there isn't, no. Okay, so if you, it is orientated north here, so the top is north, the bottom is south. So the neighbour that we went into was, if you see the two semi-detached dwellings just to the north of the site, above it, it was the one on the right that we went into. So the new development will be to the south. And we saw in those photos, I'll just go back to them. Yep, so the sun there is to the southeast, and it will be moving across to the west. So it would be coming kind of above or behind the house and the new development. So there may be some loss of light. In my report, I have acknowledged this. I don't have exact figures. There is no light study done. So it was a judgment that was made that there may be some loss of light to the gardens. However, I came to the conclusion that this wouldn't come to a significant loss of amenity. However, members are, of course, welcome to come to a different conclusion.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. So while you've got that picture up, firstly, just trying to understand where the lines of the new extension are going to come. So looking at the picture on the left then, they're going to come above the existing roof, where the roof ridge line is, where the guttering is. It's going to come higher than that, and it's going to come out further than that photograph. Is that right?
So, yeah, the height is just slightly higher than the eaves, you can see here. And then, if we look at the existing...
Aeroplane.
Or, yeah, block plans might be best. So, the area that's directly adjoined to the house right now, that won't be coming further towards the boundary. However, the part that kind of goes to the, how to explain without a cursor. If you can see, the larger part kind of comes further towards the boundary by approximately 2.5 metres. So if I go back to that photograph, I'm not sure if you can quite see it. So this area that you can see, this ground floor part that you can see beyond the fence, will be part of the link. So that won't come any further forward. It's the part that's kind of set beyond that, which will be coming further towards the boundary.
So effectively, if I'm looking at that picture on the left, it's going to completely block out that area that I can see with the trees and the right way out to the edge of the photograph and up above the level of the guttering on the roof. Is that about right?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Okay. Second question, sorry, it's not in your presentation, so don't worry if you haven't got it, but there was a first floor plan, proposed first floor plan. I don't know if you have that. It says superseded first floor plan as proposed. That one there. So looking at the proposed, I mean, I can see from that picture, obviously this is the first floor, so the ground floor is much bigger. But it's starting to look like another house on the side of this house. I can understand the neighbours' concern about the fact that it's gone from, say, 156 to 318 metres. This isn't garage provision, this is living accommodation. And it's looking very similar to the size of the original house footprint. Would you agree with that?
So I don't have the exact house footprint calculations. It is quite large. However, it is ancillary to the house. If there were a desire to turn it into a separate house in the future, it would require planning permission to do that. Yeah, it is quite large, which I believe I have acknowledged in the report. However, due to the design, I have come to the conclusion that it is acceptable. Again, councillors are welcome to come to their own conclusions on that.
Okay, thank you.
Next question. Somebody wants to catch my eye? Councillor Hodge.
Question. The appeal that was referred to in the, I don't know whether it's possible to mention of 29, number 29, I think it was. Were you aware of the appeal of another?
I don't think so. So I think number 29 is possibly on a different road almost. I think this cul-de-sac is even numbers, and then there's a cul-de-sac opposite.
But to your knowledge, was there an appeal that was relevant to
I may have come across it in my initial investigations. I wouldn't know the details of it. I don't recall it.
Okay. The other thing I wouldn't mind seeing again is that I'm thinking about overdevelopment of the site and the aerial photo that shows all the developments looking down on this particular property. Thank you.
Does that conclude your question? Yes. Yeah. Right. Any further questions? Right. So we'll move on to the debate. And again, Councillor Simon is a ward councillor for this area, so I invite him to speak first.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I must apologise that I wasn't able to join the site visit. I'm not sure if everyone was here when I explained that I'm a member of the Audit Committee of the West of England Combined Authority, and I had to give priority to that councillor commitment. I took the view last month that this was a fairly straightforward extension of the sort we routinely approve, and I was inclined to approve it. But because colleagues have been to the site visit, I'll defer expressing a final view until I hear your views following the site visit.
Thank you. Who would like to speak next? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Firstly, I mean, I think the site visit was certainly very useful, and the impact for me from the site visit was to understand how enclosed this site is, surrounded on all sides, and it's a very, very confined space. And I think the photograph that we saw earlier bears that out, about how imposing even the existing developments are and extensions, let alone this new one. I have concerns about the design. I think certainly metal cladding, it's got that industrial look about it, that industrial container look, which, I mean, it might very well be an interesting architectural statement, but again, completely out of touch with the setting that it's in. If it was a barn development somewhere, then perhaps, but in this setting, I think it's totally out of context. The properties surrounding this property are all quite uniform. I appreciate what the applicant mentioned. There was a property, I think you can see it in the top left there, which is slightly different. I personally don't think it's particularly attractive, and I certainly wouldn't use that as a reason to allow another similar design to happen in the area. I just hope we just learn from our lessons. So I would say, from my point of view, this is not acceptable. I think it's an overdevelopment of the site, and I think it's completely out of context, particularly in a World Heritage site. So I shan't be supporting it.
Is that a motion, or are you going to wait to hear more?
Would you like a motion?
It's for you to decide.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose that we
overturn the officer's recommendation.
Recommendation, yeah, absolutely.
Right. Is there a so just to be clear, that's on the grounds of overdevelopment and the materials.
Yes.
Right. Is there a seconder for that?
Sorry, and design context. For
design.
Yeah, Chair, I'll second.
Is there your second?
Yes.
Right, Councillor Halson.
Yeah, Chair, I'll second that. I'm in broad agreement with Councillor Hughes on this. Not quite sure about impact on World Heritage site, but certainly when you look at the aerial photograph, then that's really useful. And also, thank you to the neighbours for allowing us to see from their view, and also the applicants for welcoming us to their property to really appreciate the proposal in context. It's quite a dense neighbourhood around there. The buildings are quite tightly packed, but they still do benefit from modest-sized gardens, and I think that's an important element of this. I think there is a need for that degree of space between buildings. I'm not necessarily agreeing that there'd be any impact upon those residents in the avenue in terms of loss of light, as we've seen from those photographs that were taken on the day of the site visit. But I do feel that the blockiness, the height of the design, the flat roof aspect, the materials to a degree, although we must bear in mind, and we did notice, and you can see actually on the second photo on the right-hand side, on the lower left, there is an extension that does utilise modern metal-based cladding. I just feel that placing a second storey above the existing in this context will have an oppressive impact upon the neighbours. And we also haven't really considered the other neighbour, actually within Woodlands itself, where you're going to have two-storey flank wall sticking out beyond the front of their property. So, yeah, I'm agreeing to second this on the basis of overdevelopment and oppressive impact upon the amenities of neighbours.
Thank you. Does anybody want to speak? Councillor Hodge and then Councillor Jackson.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Hughes and Councillor Halsall. And I think, I'm not sure what time of day that photo was taken, but I feel this development of houses in the 60s gave each house a modest area of green space to enjoy outside the property. And I think the extent of development in this proposal on this particular house that has already been developed, with the orientation of the house and the orientation of the gardens, will mean that the garden that we saw will, from number 14, I think it would have a significant impact on the light to that garden and affect the amenity of the residents in that house, in their garden and conservatory. So I'm concerned about the overdevelopment and the impact on neighbours' amenity.
Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that there's an unacceptable degree of impact on the light to the neighbour whose garden we visited. I know it's already dark, but when Councillor Hughes was drawing out the officer and questioning them about the projection of the upper story, I know we haven't got a light survey here, but I think it would take out too much of the light from that garden, so it's loss of amenity to the neighbours behind. And secondly, I think Councillor Hughes should be agreeing with the man the whole time. I think it's an inappropriate materials in this location. I'm not normally a fan of timber, but I did think that the way timber cladding had been used on the other houses in the road was actually quite effective and made them much more interesting. And had this been timber, I think I would have not felt so uneasy about the whole application. So I think it's inappropriate materials in this location.
Right, thank you. Does anybody else want to speak? Right, just before I go to the vote, I just want to say a couple of words. Could you bring up the photograph that was taken from 14 The Avenue, showing the view back? Yeah. As I'm the last to speak, I don't want to be influencing anybody, but I was struck when I was in that garden at the size of what's proposed in relation to their garden. There is a policy D2, and it talks about the development needing to positively respond to site context, and it mentions spacing and some other words that could be applied here. To my mind, it would completely dominate that view and significantly affect the occupants of 14 The Avenue. And it's interesting, in the case officer's report, it is acknowledged that there's likely to be some increased overbearing impact, loss of light, overshadowing to neighbouring gardens, however, not to a level which would warrant refusal. That's obviously a subjective view of the case officer. It's a professional view, but I take a different view. I think it is of a scale to warrant refusal. So I'll go to the vote now.
Can I just clarify the reasons?
Sure, right. We need to be absolutely sure of the reasons. So going back to Councillor Hughes, as you proposed the motion, would you like to set out the reasons for refusal? If we do.
Sorry, which ones are you not clear about?
So,
overdevelopment is...
So I did get your list of things, but I don't believe you actually touched directly or explicitly on residential amenity, which then Councillor Halsall did say he didn't have an issue with the light, but then did have an issue with it being oppressive. And then there was a lot of comments around the room about there being an impact on light. So I was a little bit unclear. So obviously you need to clarify what the motion is, and that needs to be seconded by Councillor Halsall. Yes, and I just to elaborate a little bit on what the chair said, the policy test in D6 is that it's not just that there should not be any harm. It should be should not cause significant harm. So the test is significant harm that we're looking at. Just so you're aware when you're weighing it up in your mind. Yes, yes, if we can have that clarification, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, are you asking me to give you policy numbers? Because I think that's your job.
Shall I read out what I think? So I've heard in your motion you were talking about the proposal being out of keeping with the character and appearance of the area, overdeveloped, the material is not appropriate design form. Could you just confirm whether or not you are concerned, you are raising a reason for refusal in relation to the impact on the amenity of the neighbours?
Absolutely.
And is that in relation to overbearing impact, or is it in relation to the loss of light, or is it both?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, it's certainly overbearing, and it will affect light, not necessarily direct sunlight, but it will impact light within that area, just by the fact that it blocks out that entire skyline there.
Just final clarification, apologies for banging on. In terms of the impacts, are we talking about the impact on properties on the avenue or the adjacent property at Woodland Grove? Because again, there were some comments either way.
Within the blocking is in the avenue, of course. But as I say, it's a very confined area, and it borders houses on. I mean, there is another property that borders it quite closely as well, and I think that. I don't know what that road's called. Oakley? I don't know if it, I don't know. Actually, no, it wouldn't. It would still come under Woodland Grove, I suspect.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it is important that we identify who is going to suffer the loss of amenity. So I think we have, yes, so thank you. So we're ready, I think, for the vote, which, so it's to overturn the officer recommendation to permit for the reasons given. Motion proposed by Councillor Hughes, and it was seconded by Councillor Halsall. So all those in favour of overturning the officer recommendation to permit, please show.
9.
Any against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. Okay, so that motion is carried. Right, thank you, everyone. If you're here just for that item, I'll just pause for a couple of minutes while you quietly leave. But you know, you're welcome to stay. Right, thank you. We move on. There are no main plans applications for consideration. So we move to item 9, which is the appeals report. Do we have any questions or comments on the appeals report? Councillor Jackson.
We seem to have a reasonable rate of success again. I just wondered, though, a question about 124 Old Fosh Road. I didn't manage to look this one up last night because of an IT problem. Is this setting a precedent, or because we get this kind of application come in, will this be, have wider implications? As I said, I'm so sorry, I haven't managed.
That's okay, Councillor Jackson. It was a relatively straightforward sort of judgment on highways grounds. The applicants wanted to create a drop curb to provide an off-street parking space, but they didn't really have sufficient space at the front of their property, and the Highways Authority ruled that they would likely, any car parked on there would either have to reverse off or would be parked in such a way that would inhibit the use of the pavement, and the inspector completely agreed with that and just said, yep, that's not acceptable. So I don't think it really adds significantly to the sort of weight of case law or cases that set any sort of precedent, but useful win nevertheless.
Councillor Simon.
Yeah, at our last meeting, we discussed an enforcement matter, minute 93, and Chrissy's colleague agreed to come back to us about that, but I don't think we've had a note round. Could we invite a short note about Roman City Guest House and the implications of the decision and what's happening on that property?
Most certainly, I'll follow that up with the enforcement team manager immediately after this meeting.
But I think there's also an outstanding application, so if you could cover the site generally and the line being taken, that'd be helpful.
Will do.
Right, thank you. Right, a couple of dates. We don't have a site visit date following this meeting. The date of our next meeting, committee meeting, is Wednesday the 10th of April. It's likely to be quite a substantial agenda that day. But also, you may or may not have picked up an email from Mr. Criggs-Tregarthen to do with a briefing beforehand relating to a major application that we're going to hear at the April committee meeting. And if I've written it down correctly, it's Friday the 5th of April at 11 o'clock on Teams. So it's to do with the highways aspects. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Not really much more than obviously the application was deferred from the November committee meeting, and one of the key matters that members wanted more information on was highways, and we've had that information. It's been put out to public consultation as well. We've had a lot of comment, and I know a lot of people have been talking about the highways matters. So, and there's obviously scope to be slightly overwhelmed by the amount of technical information in the application. So we thought it best to have a briefing with the Highways Authority in attendance to explain what has actually been received and answer some of those questions in a format where we've got a little bit more. There's a little bit less stress going on than would be in the banqueting room. So if you can't make it or the times don't work for a number of you, I can reschedule, but hopefully that date does work. I'd check calendars.
Right, thank you everybody. Thank you to the case officers, the officers on the top table, everybody here, but we have another question from Councillor Jackson.
I'm going to get a red flag. I think it'd be quite appropriate to wave it at you. Sorry, did I get that right? You said the 5th of April for this highways briefing. Is it going to be an actual physical, or are we going to be Zoom teaming?
No, I did say it was a Teams meeting on the computer.
That's the first thing. Second thing, I got an email yesterday saying that we were going to have a briefing on English Combe Lane on the 8th of April. And this is very awkward, and I was wondering if we could possibly combine it with the group leaders meeting on the 9th, or alternatively have it before the DMC meeting on the 10th. Because otherwise we've got 4 consecutive working days with planning committee, and it's a bit much, quite frankly. I sent you an email to that effect, but if we could possibly move the one on the 8th on English Combe Lane, I'd be very grateful.
I'll look into that matter and come back to you.
Okay, I formally close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.